All right, I am back with this MacBook repair and I'm ready to slap us a brand spanking new connector on here. If you're not familiar with what I've done up to this point, just scroll back to the previous video that I posted about this MacBook. It'll be labeled part 1 and you will see that I put some micro jumpers in place so that we can get hooked up to where the connector was just torn off of the board. I did go ahead and take the board out of this MacBook, and I did that because I suspect that I'm going to have to get everything pretty stinking hot in order to get the ground joints to flow properly. And I think that would just be easier to come at it from the other way, and also we're not going to have the body of the MacBook itself pulling heat out of this board. So there's what that looks like under the microscope. I'm going to go ahead and clean up our ground legs here and get this ready for some brand spanking newness. I'm going to start by flooding these with some leaded solder so that I can get this cleaned up pretty nicely. Ooh, hey, that came off there a little easier than I thought. You know, I might not have had to pull the board out of this one. A little late for that now, isn't it? So that's got those pretty well cleaned off of there. And just to be a little bit extra, I'm going to take us some solder wick and wick those off flat. Because you know the rest of it's going to be perfectly flat, right? Huh. You know, maybe those aren't actually hooked to the ground plane. That seems to have happened really easy. Again, I've never done this before. Yeah, if I didn't know any better, I think those pads, are they actually separate from the ground plane? That happened really, really easy. Huh. All right, so there's the brand spanking new connector on the tip of my finger. First, I'm going to be trying to solder these two ground joints here on the end, which now realizing that the ground pads themselves may not even be ground pads, that's going to make this a little bit easier. So that connector, it's going to sit on the board just about like that. All right, so we'll back this up just a smidgen. I'm going to put a dot of flux there, and now I'm going to use the micro pencil to see if I can tack this thing onto the board. Everything's different now that I realize that that's not actually ground pads. It's just some sort of glued on anchors. And I'm only saying that because that was way too easy to get solder to flow. Like if it was part of the ground plane on this board, that would have been much, much more difficult. So here goes the first one. Just like that. All right, let's do the second one. I'm going to change the position of my solder a little bit. This is 6337 leaded solder that I'm using. It'll make for very, very strong solder joints here. Yeah, if I had fully realized that that was not ground, I wouldn't have taken the board out. Huh. Oh boy, oh boy. Live and learn. Everybody gets to laugh at Jason today, right? All right, let's go ahead and solder these other 3 pins, and then I'll worry about hooking up our actual ground. All right, so we'll get us just a little bit of flux on here. Now the same thing, I'm using 6337 leaded solder paste. And we're just going to try to get this to solder to those jumper wires. I should have tinned the jumper wires, but I'm a little too late now. Yeah, I really wish I would have tinned those jumper wires. So let's just get us some more flux on there. And I'm going to try to get the iron in beside the pins now and try to get more solder on those squiggly wires. I really should have tinned those jumpers before proceeding, but here we go. So let's just try to get in here next to the pin. That one looks good. Good. It's just marvelous. It's always nice to have a big fat blob of solder, you know, just kind of bridging everything together. Let's get some more flux on here. Just trying to make sure it gets stuck to the wire down below. Now let's see if I can get rid of that little solder bridge. All right, here we go. Solder bridge, delete. No solder bridges. Okay, now let's just nitpick around at this. I'm really just trying to make sure we've got a connection to the wires down below. And I think it's pretty safe to say I've got the pads tinned now. Okay. That looks marvelous. Also marvelous. Marvelous. And then the final pin. Almost marvelous, but we're going to need some more flux. Why am I going to nitpick this? Marvelous. Let's leave that just like it is. All right, I'm going to clean this up with a little bit of alcohol and then decide where I'm going to hook up the grounds, because I'm just noticing there's actually 2 sections of board here. And I'm not familiar enough to know, but we might have, you know, this might not actually be ground that's right next to those pins. When I originally left those out, I was assuming that the big old plane right next to the connector there was ground plane, but now I have my doubts. I'm just going to scratch it right there. And also scratch it right here. One of those scratches will not be used. All right, I got the meter in beep mode. And I'm going to see if these are both the same connection. So right out here on this one, right here on this one. No, they are not the same. So one of these is ground and the other one is not ground. Ah, yes, it's fairly interesting. Let's switch over and have a look at Flexboard view. So according to the almighty Flexboard view, what can we do here? I need to verify what is ground and what is not. I can actually use the insides of these big capacitors right here. This will be the same as the connection that should be here at pins 5 and 6 on our beloved brand new connector. And actually, I think I can see which is ground and which is not. Right here on the on this capacitor right here, we should get a beep here. Yeah, so beep here, but no beep here, which means this is not ground, and I don't exactly know what it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover up that little scratcheroo that I made with some green UV mask. I should have just looked by eye to start with, because you can actually see which is hooked to those capacitors and which is not. So whatever this is, we do not want it exposed. Okay, so with that geared up, I'm going to go ahead and hook us up a nice proper ground here. And I'm going to be soldering that probably right here. Seems like a fabulous place to put a ground. Now this is what a ground connection should do. Like, it is going to be, see it getting grungy, and like my tip is even sticking to the board. Like it doesn't flow the way that it's supposed to. So the reason why I knew the anchors on that connector were not actually ground is because of that. Like, this is what a ground connection should do. It should behave like complete total garbage, and it will take a significant amount of effort to get that to stick there. So right there is where I want that ground connection to be, and it will take some effort. I'm just going to go ahead and try to get that wire out of the way a little more. I don't want it to touch the pins yet. And to get that to stick, I'm going to have to use a full-size iron for sure, like definitely. And here we go. That's a little better, but I don't think we'll get a good solder joint there unless I warm the board up. It's going to take a little bit of preheating to get this board to where that solder joint will flow. And that is the reason why I took this board out of the housing, because of the crazy amount of heat that it's going to take to make that ground joint flow. So I'm just going to warm the whole entire board up. Sit here and warm this up with hot air for a few minutes, make the board hot. Also want to try a little bit not to melt the connector, you know. All right, so the board's starting to feel pretty stinking hot. I see some flux bubbling. I'm gonna add a little bit more flux, and then I'm gonna take us a blob of 6337 leaded solder on my micro pencil and try to get it to flow onto this ground. Much better already. I think we're gonna accept it. I could sit here and royally nitpick this, but I'm not going to because I need to get this job done. All right, so now we have a somewhat properly soldered ground, and I'm going to bring that right around and bang it onto the pins. Okay, so we will need that wire now to solder to these two pins. See if I can get them lined up somewhat okay. Maybe if I could press it under them would be good. Okay. I don't know which one or if, you know, either of those pins actually matter, but I just want to make sure they both get pretty good and stuck to this piece of wire. 1, 2. Gonna hit that a little bit more to make it somewhat more pretty. And then instead of trimming off the excess wire, I'm just gonna solder it to itself. Oh yeah. Just a smidgen more flux on that. All right, we have a very strong ground wire hooked up now. There's no way that that's coming loose. Dun 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 dun. Almost there. I do like the flux that I use, but it is a pain in the neck to clean this stuff up. Like this sticky tacky flux is really sticky. And it gets everywhere. That's not my solder ball. Look at that. That's not my solder ball either. This thing has solder balls all over it that aren't mine. Yeah, this Chip Quick Tacky Flux, it is a royal pain in the neck to get all the way out of here, and I need it all to be gone because I'm planning to use some adhesive to stick this down to the board a little better. As it is now, it is pretty strong, but I want it to be able to pretty easily survive future battery replacements. And, you know, aside from somebody prying on the wrong side of it, you know, the latch is on one side, not on the other side. All right, so that has all the flux gone, or most all of the flux gone out of the connector. And now we can get a much closer look at how those pins are connected. It's not the prettiest solder joints in the world, but they are all anchored down very well to the, you know, to the wires that I got going down inside the board. So I'm really confident that that will stay connected. It's not the prettiest in the world, but it is extremely solid. Now, let's make sure that we do have good diode mode readings. I don't want to mess up and not have something connected. So I'm putting my meter in diode mode. I'm going to use my red probe on ground. And I'm going to use my black probe to do the probing. First of all, the first pin here we had, it should get 0 ohms to here. We do, 0.00 voltage drop to ground. And then from ground to the next one, we should get like a 0.42. We do. Next one is a 0.42. We do. And then the first one was just going to a test point. So we should get open line. I'm going to sort of act like a madman and go ahead and insulate my ground wire and also maybe get some UV mask there. So I'll take just a smidgen of mask, and this is also to hold this wire in place. Whoops, I don't want it vibrating, and I don't want somebody coming along with a number 11 X-Acto blade and accidentally cutting it. So I'll just put some mask over the top of that to hold it down. And right here, right at the pins, and maybe even slightly under a little bit. We don't want to get it to where the UV light won't get to it, because anywhere the sun don't shine, it's not going to get hard. So all right, I'm going to stop right there and cure that up with a lamp. Now, I said that I was going to secure this connector to the board with glue anyways, and from here, it actually probably wouldn't really be necessary, but with future battery replacements, if somebody sticks a screwdriver even under the proper side and they go to lift up on that latch, I just want to make absolutely sure that none of those wires are going to get pulled up out of the board. And the way this connector is designed, it's only being held down on the one end where the two anchors are. The other end, it's just being held down with the pins that are soldered on. I think Apple may have put glue under the original one, the way it was torn apart, but I'm really not sure. So to secure this thing to the board, we're going to be using a little bit of hot glue. Only if you look at the size of my hot glue nozzle compared to that connector, it's a little bit large, you know? So if I just come along and try to some hot glue on there, one little drop out of this hot glue gun is going to totally smear this thing out. So I'm going to share with you all my very most favorite way to apply hot glue in the whole entire world. As you can see, this stick of hot glue, it's already had a little bit of action. And what I'm going to do here is just cut us some slivers with an X-Acto blade. Okay, so there's one little piece. Actually, we're going to make that 2 or 3 little pieces. All right, set this right down here on my cutting board that I just made. This way, okay, there's one piece. Do the same thing to this other one. Two pieces. And then this one here, we can leave a little bit long. I'm going to shave it off a little bit anyways. There is our 3 sticks of hot glue. So now I'm going to take the first stick of glue and lay it right here next to this connector and start warming this up. Okay, now we're going to glue this connector down to the board just like it sits. Just marvelous. All right, so there's one side of that connector locked down to the board. And then as you can see, my hot glue sticks are still too big. I'm just going to go ahead and use them anyways. All right, let's do the outside of that connector. Lay us a piece of glue right here. We just want to be careful not to get it on the latch, period. Like, definitely do not get it on the latch. We're going to melt this down to the board and to the side of that connector. Marvelous. I'm using 220 degrees C with an airflow of 10. All right, now I do have one more piece of glue to apply, and I am really questioning myself as to whether or not I'm going to do this. Let's just see what it looks like. I'm planning on laying this across all of the pins right here. I just have to make sure that it's not going to get in the lid whatsoever. So to be absolutely sure, I think I'm going to trim that down a little bit farther. I can't glue the latch down, people. So I'm going to take and slice this off a little farther. Right about there. And I'm going to use the smaller part of that. Okay. And that piece, I'm going to lay it right across all of these pins and try to get all that locked down to the board. a little more than just where my solder is. I want to try to make some structure here. This glue that I'm using, it dries pretty stinking hard. So let's flip it over and do the flat side. And here we go. We're going to just melt this down to the board. Not working as well as I thought so far, so I'm going to give it a little guidance. Now just on the ends of these pins will be fine. We don't want to get it on top because then I'm worried it's going to interfere with the latch. And there you have it. We have a beautifully soldered and then glued battery connector. All right, throw my little cutting board aside. Oh, by the way, my cutting board is the handle on this thing. I've used this hot glue stick 350 times and you can't even tell I've cut any glue off of it. So there is a good look at that connector. It is rock solid on the board. It is soldered very firmly. And then I just took us a tiny bead of hot glue and ran all around the outside of it. The hot glue will keep this thing from being pulled off the board again, and it will survive future latchings without coming loose. And now it's time for me to put the MacBook back together and see if it works. So I'll be back with you in a moment. Dun da da dun 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 da da dun dun dun. Ta-da! Latch it down. Slap a piece of tape over it, and now let's see if this thing is going to charge the battery, shall we? I'm going to connect the charger. We get 5 volts. I'm seeing 20 volts. I'm seeing 1.5 amps of charging current. And we have fan spin, and we have Apple logo. As you can see, the battery charging is normal. We are up to 57%, and we have 1 hour remaining. So now I've got this thing fully reassembled, and this is what our repair looks like to the semi-naked eye. You can see that the amount of hot glue that I used that looks like really big and like a big old blob of it under the microscope is really just a tiny little bit on both sides and also out here on the end. And I have also went ahead and replaced the torn trackpad cable. Let's not forget to put this little protective cover back in place. It's kind of hard to do with one hand, but it should go somewhere right in there like that. So I have this MacBook all the way reassembled, and it is time for me to move on. It actually took me a little bit more time than expected because I ordered the wrong trackpad cable, but that is now resolved. And that is it for this one, everybody. If you like my videos, please give me a big thumbs up. It really helps me to keep this channel going, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day.